I never imagined that the sound of a key turning in a lock could break a heart. But it did. Mine shattered into 1,000 pieces that rainy evening, each fragment cutting deeper than the last. My name is Sandra, and I'm 63 years old. I've lived long enough to know that life isn't fair, that people disappoint you, and that sometimes the ones you love most are the ones who hurt you worst. But knowing something in your head and feeling it tear through your chest are two completely different things. I stood there on the porch of what used to be my home, the house my parents left me, the house where I raised my son alone after his father abandoned us when Eric was just 3 years old. The rain soaked through my worn jacket, the one I'd been wearing for 5 years because new clothes were a luxury I couldn't afford. My hands trembled as I tried my key again, certain there must be some mistake. The lock didn't turn. It wouldn't. It couldn't, because my own son had changed it. I heard footsteps inside, heavy and angry, and then the door swung open. Eric stood there, his face twisted with an expression I'd never seen before. This wasn't my boy, the child I'd rocked through fevers, the teenager I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college, the young man I'd been so proud of when he graduated. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. "What are you doing here?" His voice was cold, sharp as winter wind. "Eric, my key doesn't work. I think there's no mistake, Mother." He spat the word like it tasted bitter. "If you don't pay, you don't live here. That's how it works in the real world." I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind him, I could see her, Melissa, his wife of 18 months, standing in my living room, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd finally gotten what she wanted. "Eric, this is my house. Your grandparents left it to me. I gave it to you because I wanted you to have security, because I thought—" "You gave it to me," he interrupted, his voice rising, "which means it's mine now, and Melissa and I have decided we need our space. You're always here, always in the way, always reminding us that you exist. We can't live our lives with you hanging around like some kind of ghost." The rain poured harder, mixing with tears I didn't know I was crying. "But I have nowhere to go. Eric, please, I'm your mother." "Then you should have thought about that before becoming such a burden." Melissa's voice drifted from inside, sweet and poisonous. "We're trying to build a life here, Sandra. We can't do that with you freeloading off us." Freeloading. The word hit me like a slap. I'd worked as a cleaner for 30 years to raise this boy. I'd scrubbed toilets in office buildings so he could have new school supplies. I'd skipped meals so he could eat his fill. I'd sacrificed my entire youth, my health, my dreams, everything, so he could have opportunities I never had. And now I was a freeloader. "I just need a few days," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Just until I can figure something out. Please, Eric, I'm begging you." For a moment, just a flicker, I saw something in his eyes. Hesitation? Guilt? But then Melissa appeared beside him, her hand on his arm, her perfectly manicured nails a stark contrast to my work-worn hands. "We've already discussed this, honey," she said to him, never taking her eyes off me. "You can't let her manipulate you with tears. She's been doing it your whole life." Eric's jaw tightened. "Mom, I'll give you until tomorrow to get your things. Whatever you don't take, we're throwing out." The door closed. I heard the new lock click into place, final as a coffin lid. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking through every layer of clothing until I couldn't tell what was rain and what were tears. The porch light, the one I'd replaced just last month when it burned out, cast a yellow glow that made everything look sick and wrong. This porch where I'd taken photos of Eric on his first day of school every year, where I'd sat with him after his first heartbreak, holding him while he cried, where I'd waved goodbye when he left for college, so proud I thought my heart might burst. All those memories, and now I wasn't even allowed to stand here. The neighbors' windows glowed with warm light. I could see the Johnsons eating dinner together, the Chen family watching television, old Mrs. Patterson knitting in her armchair. Normal lives. Safe lives. Lives that hadn't been stolen from them by their own children. I picked up my work bag, still damp from the rain, and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stand on that porch anymore, staring at the closed door of the life I used to have. My mind kept circling back to one question. How did I become invisible to my own son? It hadn't always been this way. Eric used to call me every day when he first moved out. He'd bring his laundry over on Sundays and we'd talk while I washed his clothes. Me at the machine, him at the kitchen table, telling me about his job, his friends, his life. I'd cook his favorite meals, and he'd eat them with the enthusiasm of a boy who'd never stopped being grateful for his mother's love. Then he met Melissa. She was beautiful in the way magazines defined beauty. Thin, polished, expensive-looking. She worked in marketing for some big company downtown, wore designer clothes, and spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never known real hardship. I tried to like her. I tried so hard. But from our very first meeting, I could see the way she looked at me. At my worn clothes, my calloused hands, my gray-streaked hair that I cut myself to save money. She saw someone beneath her, someone embarrassing, someone to be tolerated at best and eliminated at worst. The changes started small. Eric's Sunday visits became every other Sunday, then monthly, then only on holidays. When he did come, Melissa usually had some reason to cut the visit short. "We have dinner plans. Eric has work to catch up on. We're meeting with our financial advisor. If you're watching this story and feeling your heart break along with mine, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. And please, comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know there are others out there who understand this pain." The wedding was beautiful. I wasn't involved in planning it. Melissa's mother handled everything. But I was invited. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for my own mother's funeral 10 years ago. I sat in the third row, surrounded by Melissa's wealthy relatives who spoke about vacation homes and investment portfolios, and I felt like an imposter in my son's new life. At the reception, Melissa's mother asked what I did for work. When I told her I was a cleaner, the conversation died instantly. She excused herself and never spoke to me again that night. I watched Eric dance with his new bride, watched him laugh with her friends, watched him become someone I didn't quite recognize. 6 months after the wedding, Eric asked if he and Melissa could move into my house. "Just temporarily," he said. "We're trying to save for our own place, and rent is so expensive. You have all that space, Mom. It would really help us out. Tentar novamente." Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? I convinced myself it would be nice to have company again, to hear voices in the house that had been too quiet since Eric moved out for college all those years ago. I told myself we'd have family dinners again, that maybe I'd finally get to know my daughter-in-law better, that this could be a chance to rebuild the closeness Eric and I had lost. I was such a fool. The first week was almost pleasant. Melissa smiled when she saw me, asked polite questions about my day, even offered to help with dinner once or twice. But I should have noticed the way she inspected everything, running her finger along shelves, checking for dust, opening cabinets and rearranging their contents, commenting on how outdated the furniture was, how depressing the wallpaper looked. "This house has good bones," she said one evening while Eric was in the shower, "but it needs serious updating. It's like living in a time capsule from the 70s. I'd wanted to say that this house had raised a good man, that these walls had sheltered us through storms both literal and metaphorical, that maybe old didn't mean worthless, but I didn't. I just smiled and nodded, like I'd learned to do whenever Melissa shared her opinions. By the second month, the politeness had evaporated like morning dew. Melissa stopped asking about my day. She stopped acknowledging me when she came home from work. I'd be in the kitchen preparing dinner, and she'd walk right past me without a word, her expensive heels clicking on the linoleum floor I'd scrubbed that morning before my shift. "Eric, can you tell your mother that we prefer to eat dinner at 7, not 6:30? She'd call out, as if I wasn't standing 10 feet away. "Mom, would you mind eating a bit later?" Eric would relay dutifully, not meeting my eyes. "Of course," I'd say, swallowing the hurt. "Whatever works best for you both." The requests, or rather demands, became more frequent and more pointed. Could I do their laundry? Could I clean their bathroom? Could I pick up Eric's dry cleaning on my way home from work? Could I make sure to be quieter in the mornings, because Melissa was a light sleeper? Could I stop watching television in the living room after 8 because they wanted privacy? I did everything they asked. I made myself smaller, quieter, less present in my own home. I started eating my meals in my bedroom to give them space. I stopped using the living room entirely. I tiptoed through the house like a ghost, trying not to disturb the life they were building in the spaces I used to occupy. But it was never enough. Nothing I did was ever enough. "Your mother left dishes in the sink again," I heard Melissa complain one night through the thin walls. "I'm tired of living with a slob." I'd washed those dishes. I'd washed them, dried them, and put them away before I left for work. The dishes in the sink were theirs, from the lunch they'd made after I left. But Eric didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He just murmured something apologetic, and I heard her satisfied laugh in response. The invisible lines in the house became more defined. Their bedroom, which used to be the master suite, my room for 40 years, was off limits to me now. The living room was essentially theirs, though no one explicitly said so. I retreated to the smallest bedroom, the one that had been Eric's when he was a child, surrounded by faded wallpaper covered in rockets and astronauts. I'd lie awake in that narrow bed, staring at those childhood rockets, remembering the boy who'd dreamed of space exploration, the boy who'd hugged me tight and said, "You're the best mom in the whole universe." That boy seemed as distant and unreachable as the stars he'd once wanted to visit. Money became the next battlefield. I'd been paying all the utilities since they moved in. It seemed only fair since I was the homeowner and they were saving for their future. I bought groceries for all three of us, cleaned, cooked, maintained the house. I never asked them for rent or contributions because Eric was my son, and you don't charge your son rent. That's what I told myself. But Melissa had different ideas. "Eric and I have been talking," she announced one Sunday morning over coffee I'd made but wasn't invited to share. "We think you should start contributing more to the household expenses." I looked up from the dishes I was washing. Their breakfast dishes, though I'd eaten hours earlier before my weekend shift. "I pay all the utilities and buy all the food." "Yes, but we live here too, and this house is quite large. The maintenance costs must be substantial. Eric says the property taxes are high. We think you should pay us rent." The dish I was holding slipped from my soapy hands and clattered in the sink. "Pay you rent? This is my house." "Actually," Melissa corrected, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Eric showed me the deed transfer. This house belongs to him now. You transferred ownership 3 years ago, remember? You wanted him to have security, to have assets for his future. Those were your words." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the sink to steady myself. Yes, I'd transferred the deed. My lawyer had advised against it, but I'd insisted. I wanted Eric to have something solid, something that couldn't be taken away. I wanted him to feel secure in ways I never had. The house was paid off. My parents had left it to me mortgage-free, and I thought giving it to Eric was the ultimate gift a mother could give her child. I never imagined he'd use that gift to make me pay for the privilege of living in the home where I'd raised him. "How much?" My voice came out as a whisper. "We think $800 a month is fair. That's below market rate for a room this size." $800. More than half my monthly income from cleaning offices. After paying rent to my own son, I'd barely have enough left for food and basic necessities. Forget savings. Forget emergencies. Forget ever being able to afford to leave. "I can't afford that," I said honestly. "Melissa, I make minimum wage. After rent, I'd have almost nothing left." She shrugged, examining her perfect manicure. "Then I suggest you find a better job. Or maybe start contributing less to things like groceries. We can buy our own food and you can buy yours. That might help your budget." Eric walked in then, and I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for any sign of the boy I'd raised. "Eric, you can't be serious about this. This is my home." "Was your home," Melissa corrected before Eric could speak. "Now it's ours. And frankly, Sandra, we're being generous. Most landlords would charge much more, and they certainly wouldn't tolerate tenants who don't respect boundaries." "What boundaries have I not respected?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've done everything you asked. I've made myself invisible in my own house. I cook, I clean, I try to stay out of your way." "You're always here," Melissa interrupted, her mask of politeness finally slipping to reveal the contempt beneath. "Every time we come home, you're here. Every morning, you're here. We can't have friends over without worrying about you hovering. We can't have private conversations without wondering if you're listening through the walls. You make this house feel suffocating." "I live here." The words burst out of me, Decades of contained frustration finally breaking through. I'm sorry if my existence in my own home is inconvenient for you, but I have nowhere else to go. Then maybe, Melissa said slowly, standing up and smoothing her designer skirt, you should find somewhere else to go. Because Eric and I are building a life here, and there's no room in it for a bitter old woman who refuses to accept that her son has moved on. I looked at Eric, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd gone too far, to remember that I was his mother and I deserved respect. But he just stared at his coffee cup, his jaw tight, his silence more devastating than any words could have been. That's when I understood. This wasn't Melissa acting alone. This was both of them. Eric wanted me gone just as much as she did. Maybe he'd always wanted me gone, and Melissa had just given him permission to act on it. The next 3 months were torture. I paid the rent, $800 that left me with less than $300 for everything else. I stopped buying groceries for them, which meant I ate rice and beans most days while they ordered takeout that filled the house with smells of food I couldn't afford. I picked up extra shifts whenever possible, coming home after midnight only to wake up at 5 for my morning jobs. My body ached constantly. My knees, damaged from years of kneeling to scrub floors, screamed with every step. My hands were raw from chemicals and hot water. I was 63 years old, working 70-hour weeks, sleeping 4 hours a night, and still barely surviving in the house I'd once owned outright. I started avoiding them entirely. I'd leave for work before they woke up and return long after they'd gone to bed. On my days off, I'd spend hours at the public library, sitting in the worn chairs near the back where no one bothered me, pretending to read while actually just existing in a space where I wasn't made to feel like a burden. But even my absence became a problem. Your mother is never here, I heard Melissa tell Eric one evening when I'd come home earlier than usual to use the bathroom. I'd been holding it for hours, but the library had closed early for renovations. It's like she's avoiding us. It's passive-aggressive and honestly quite rude. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand on the bathroom doorknob, listening to my son's wife rewrite reality to suit her narrative. When I was present, I was suffocating them. When I was absent, I was being passive-aggressive. There was no way to win because the game was rigged from the start. Maybe she's just working a lot, Eric offered weakly. Or maybe she's punishing us for asking her to contribute financially like any adult should. My mother says it's pathetic how some women use guilt to manipulate their children. They sacrifice and sacrifice, but then they hold it over your head forever, expecting you to take care of them like they're helpless. I wanted to burst through that door and scream. I wanted to list every sacrifice I'd made, every meal I'd skipped so Eric could have seconds, every winter I'd kept the heat low to afford his school supplies, every dream I'd abandoned so he could chase his. But I didn't. I quietly used the bathroom, then slipped back out of the house before they knew I'd been there. Melissa's mother became a frequent visitor. Patricia was everything I wasn't: wealthy, refined, dismissive of anyone she considered beneath her social standing. She'd arrive in her luxury car wearing clothes that cost more than I made in a month, air-kissing Melissa while looking through me as if I were furniture. "Still here, I see," she remarked once, her tone making it clear that my continued existence in the house was both surprising and distasteful. "I live here, Patricia," I replied evenly, though my hands shook as I folded laundry at the kitchen table. Their laundry, because somehow that had become my responsibility again, despite the rent I paid. She sniffed. "I suppose every family has its complications. Melissa, darling, I saw the most gorgeous dining set at that boutique on Fifth Avenue. It would look stunning in here once you redecorate." They'd talk for hours about renovations they planned for my house, my parents' house, as if I weren't sitting right there, knocking down walls, updating fixtures, replacing the dated hardwood floors my father had installed with his own hands. They discussed paint colors and furniture arrangements, erasing every trace of the family who'd actually built this home with love and sacrifice. I became a ghost in my own life. I'd drift through rooms where I no longer belonged, past walls I'd painted, through doorways I'd walked through thousands of times. Every corner held memories that apparently meant nothing to anyone but me. The growth chart behind the kitchen door where I'd marked Eric's height each birthday, Melissa wanted to paint over it. The loose floorboard in the hallway that creaked just so. They planned to replace it. The garden my mother had planted, where roses bloomed every spring. Melissa wanted it paved over for a patio. The breaking point came on what should have been a day of celebration. It was my birthday, 63 years old. I didn't expect a party or gifts. I'd long since learned not to expect anything, but some small, stubborn part of me hoped Eric might remember, might acknowledge the day his mother brought him into this world. I came home from my morning shift to find them in the kitchen, and for one foolish moment, my heart lifted. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe there'd be a cake, or even just a card. "Mom," Eric said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. "We need to talk." Melissa stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression triumphant. On the table between us lay papers, official-looking documents with bold text and highlighted sections. "What is this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. You develop an instinct for disaster when you've lived through enough of them. "An eviction notice," Melissa said, not bothering to let Eric speak. "We've consulted with a lawyer. Since you're paying rent, you're legally a tenant, which means we can evict you with proper notice. This is your 30-day notice." The room spun. I grabbed the back of a chair, the same chair where I'd helped Eric with his homework, where I'd fed him breakfast before school, where he'd told me about his first crush. "Eric," I whispered, "please, look at me." He did, finally, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than anger or hatred. It was indifference. Cold, complete indifference, as if I were a stranger causing problems rather than the woman who'd given him life. "You have to understand, Mom. Melissa and I are planning to start a family. We need the space. We need privacy. And honestly, having you here is putting a strain on our marriage." "A strain?" The word came out broken. "I've done everything you asked. I pay rent in my own house. I work myself to exhaustion to stay out of your way. What more do you want from me?" "We want you to leave," Melissa said simply. "We want to live our lives without constantly worrying about you, without feeling guilty every time we want to have friends over, or make noise or just exist freely in our own home." "Your home," I repeated numbly. "This was my parents' home. This was where I raised Eric alone after his father left us. Every brick, every floorboard, every nothing." Melissa interrupted. "You gave this house to Eric. It's his now, which makes it ours. Your sob story about raising him alone doesn't entitle you to live here forever. You made your choices, Sandra. You chose to be a single mother. You chose to work minimum wage jobs. You chose to give away your only asset. Those were your decisions, and now you have to live with the consequences." Each word landed like a physical blow. This woman who'd never struggled for anything, who'd been handed every advantage from birth, was lecturing me about choices and consequences. This woman who'd married my son and immediately set about erasing me from his life was telling me I'd made bad decisions. "It's my birthday," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "Today is my birthday, Eric. Did you know that? Did you remember?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mom. I forgot. We've been dealing with a lot of stress. Sign the papers." Melissa pushed the documents toward me. "You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. If you're not out by then, we'll have the sheriff remove you. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. What choice did I have? I could refuse to sign, but they'd proceed with the eviction anyway. At least this way, I'd leave with some shred of dignity intact. As I signed my name, on my birthday, in my parents' house, I felt something inside me crack. Not break entirely, but crack, like ice beginning to fracture. And through that crack, something cold and clear began to seep in. Not anger, exactly. Not even hatred. Something quieter. Something that whispered, "You deserve better than this." I finished signing and set down the pen. "Where am I supposed to go?" Melissa shrugged. "That's not our problem. You're a grown woman. Figure it out." "Eric," I tried one more time. "Please, I'm your mother, and I'm grateful for everything you did," he said, the words rehearsed and hollow. "But I have to put my wife first now. That's what marriage means. You understand that, don't you?" I understood plenty. I understood that the boy I'd raised no longer existed. I understood that love wasn't always enough to hold people together. I understood that I'd sacrificed everything for a son who'd grown into a man who could look at his mother and feel nothing but inconvenience. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered, and walked out of the kitchen with whatever dignity I had left. That night, I lay in the rocket-covered bedroom and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. 30 days. I had 30 days to figure out how a 63-year-old cleaning woman with no savings and no family could find a place to live in a city where even studio apartments cost more than I made in a month. I thought about calling old friends, but the truth was, I didn't have any. The years of raising Eric alone, of working multiple jobs, of being too tired for social calls, those years had isolated me. The women I'd once known from the neighborhood had moved on with their lives while I'd stayed frozen in survival mode. Their Christmas cards had stopped coming years ago when I could no longer afford to send my own. I thought about shelters, and shame burned through me. How had I gone from homeowner to homeless? How had a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice led to this? Contemplating cots in church basements and meals at soup kitchens. The next morning, I started looking. I called every apartment listing in the classifieds that might be even remotely affordable. The conversations all went the same way. The rent is $900 a month, first and last month plus security deposit. I can't afford $2,700 up front. Then I can't help you. Click. Some landlords were more blunt about it. I'll need references from your previous landlords, proof of income showing you make at least 3 times the rent, and a credit check. My previous landlord was my son who was evicting me. My income was less than half of what any calculation deemed acceptable. My credit was non-existent. I'd never needed credit because I'd never had money to borrow. I was invisible to the housing market, just as I'd become invisible to my own son. The days crawled by, each one bringing me closer to homelessness. I worked my shifts in a fog, scrubbing toilets and mopping floors while my mind spun through impossible calculations. If I lived in my car, I could save on rent, but I'd need money for gas and food. If I found a shelter, I might have a bed, but I'd lose what little independence I had left. At night, I'd return to the house and try to be even more invisible than before. I'd slip in through the back door, eat whatever scraps I could assemble from the food I'd bought, and retreat to my room before Eric and Melissa came home. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing in the living room or talking about their days, or making plans for their future, and the sound was like knives sliding between my ribs. They never asked how my housing search was going. They never offered to help with deposits or references. They never apologized for making their own mother homeless on her birthday. They simply existed in their bubble of comfort, waiting for the problem of me to resolve itself. 2 weeks before my eviction date, I was cleaning an office building downtown when I overheard a conversation. 2 young women were talking by the water cooler, not noticing the old cleaning lady who was emptying trash bins nearby. "My landlord is such a jerk," one said. "He's raising my rent again. Says the market can bear it, so why shouldn't he charge it?" "That's awful," her friend replied. "Where are you going to go?" "I don't know. Maybe I'll end up like that old woman who lives in her car in the parking garage. Have you seen her? She's there every morning when I arrive." They laughed. Not cruelly, just the thoughtless laughter of young people who couldn't imagine that fate ever befalling them. Then they walked away, leaving me standing there with my trash bag, my entire future reflected in their casual conversation. A woman living in her car. That would be me in 2 weeks. I finished my shift and sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The office towers glowed gold and orange, filled with people who had homes to go to, families who wanted them, futures that held promise instead of just more survival. Something had to change. Something had to give. Because this slow erasure of everything I was, couldn't be all that was left of my life. I thought about my parents. My father had been a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands and believed in the dignity of honest work. My mother had been a seamstress, taking in alterations and mending to help make ends meet. They'd been poor, but they'd been proud. They'd owned their home outright, saved every penny, and left me something solid when they passed. And I'd given it all away to a son who'd turned it into a weapon against me. No, that wasn't quite right. I'd given it away to a little boy I'd loved with my whole heart. What happened after that wasn't my failure as a mother. It was his failure as a son, and her success as a manipulator. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder, something that whispered, "You don't deserve this." I drove back to the house, their house, and walked in to find them in the middle of dinner. They'd ordered from that expensive Italian place Melissa loved, the one where a single entree cost what I spent on groceries for a week. The smell made my stomach clench with hunger, but I walked past them without a word. "Mom," Eric called after me. "Did you find a place yet?" I stopped, but didn't turn around. "No, you've only got 2 weeks left," Melissa added, her voice sharp with impatience. "You need to take this seriously." I turned then, slowly, and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was beautiful, polished, confident. She'd never gone hungry, never worried about keeping the lights on, never sacrificed anything she didn't want to sacrifice. And she was sitting in my mother's chair, eating expensive food in my father's house, telling me I needed to take my own homelessness seriously. "I am taking it seriously," I said quietly, "more seriously than you could possibly understand." Something in my tone made Eric shift uncomfortably. "If you need help with deposits or something—" "I don't want your help." The words came out firm, final. "I don't want anything from you anymore." I walked to my room and closed the door. Behind me, I heard Melissa's voice, bright with satisfaction. "Well, that was dramatic." They laughed together, my son and his wife, and that laughter followed me into the small bedroom where I'd once tucked that boy into bed and kissed his forehead and promised him that everything would be okay. I sat on the edge of the narrow mattress and pulled out the shoebox I kept under the bed. Inside were the remnants of my life before Eric, before motherhood had consumed everything else. Old photographs of me at 20, smiling and hopeful. A certificate from the community college where I'd completed 2 semesters of business courses before I got pregnant and had to drop out. A letter of recommendation from my first employer, praising my work ethic and reliability. I'd been someone once, before I became just Eric's mom, before my entire identity was reduced to the role of mother, and then eventually to the role of burden. At the bottom of the box was something I'd almost forgotten about, a business card, yellowed with age. It was from a woman named Margaret Chen who'd run a small cleaning company. She'd tried to recruit me years ago, said I had management potential, that I could run my own crew if I wanted to. I'd turned her down because Eric was 10 and needed me home in the evenings. I held the card up to the light. The phone number was probably disconnected. Margaret was probably retired or dead, but it was something. It was a memory of a time when someone had seen potential in me instead of just seeing someone to use and discard. I tucked the card in my pocket like a talisman. The next week crept by with agonizing slowness. I worked every shift I could get, pushing my body beyond its limits. My knees swelled so badly I could barely walk some days. My hands cracked and bled from the chemicals. I was exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix, tired in my bones and in my soul. But I kept showing up, kept working, kept putting one foot in front of the other because the alternative was giving up entirely, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. With 1 week left before eviction, I still had nowhere to go. I'd looked at rooms for rent in shared houses, but they all wanted deposits I couldn't afford. I'd called shelters, but they were full or had waiting lists months long. I'd even considered reaching out to distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in decades, but pride, my last remaining possession, stopped me. That night, I lay in the rocket-covered bedroom and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. 30 days. I had 30 days to figure out how a 63-year-old cleaning woman with no savings and no family could find a place to live in a city where even studio apartments cost more than I made in a month. I thought about calling old friends, but the truth was I didn't have any. The years of raising Eric alone, of working multiple jobs, of being too tired for social calls, those years had isolated me. The women I'd once known from the neighborhood had moved on with their lives while I'd stayed frozen in survival mode. Their Christmas cards had stopped coming years ago when I could no longer afford to send my own. I thought about shelters, and shame burned through me. How had I gone from homeowner to homeless? How had a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice led to this? Contemplating cots in church basements and meals at soup kitchens. The next morning I started looking. I called every apartment listing in the classifieds that might be even remotely affordable. The conversations all went the same way. The rent is $900 a month, first and last month plus security deposit. I can't afford $2,700 up front. Then I can't help you. Click. Some landlords were more blunt about it. I'll need references from your previous landlords. Proof of income showing you make at least 3 times the rent, and a credit check. My previous landlord was my son who was evicting me. My income was less than half of what any calculation deemed acceptable. My credit was non-existent. I'd never needed credit because I'd never had money to borrow. I was invisible to the housing market, just as I'd become invisible to my own son. The days crawled by, each one bringing me closer to homelessness. I worked my shifts in a fog, scrubbing toilets and mopping floors while my mind spun through impossible calculations. If I lived in my car, I could save on rent, but I'd need money for gas and food. If I found a shelter, I might have a bed, but I'd lose what little independence I had left. At night, I'd return to the house and try to be even more invisible than before. I'd slip in through the back door, eat whatever scraps I could assemble from the food I'd bought, and retreat to my room before Eric and Melissa came home. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing in the living room, or talking about their days, or making plans for their future, and the sound was like knives sliding between my ribs. They never asked how my housing search was going. They never offered to help with deposits or references. They never apologized for making their own mother homeless on her birthday. They simply existed in their bubble of comfort, waiting for the problem of me to resolve itself. 2 weeks before my eviction date, I was cleaning an office building downtown when I overheard a conversation. 2 young women were talking by the water cooler, not noticing the old cleaning lady who was emptying trash bins nearby. "My landlord is such a jerk," one said. "He's raising my rent again. Says the market can bear it, so why shouldn't he charge it?" "That's awful," her friend replied. "Where are you going to go?" "I don't know. Maybe I'll end up like that old woman who lives in her car in the parking garage. Have you seen her? She's there every morning when I arrive." They laughed. Not cruelly, just the thoughtless laughter of young people who couldn't imagine that fate ever befalling them. Then they walked away, leaving me standing there with my trash bag, my entire future reflected in their casual conversation. A woman living in her car. That would be me in 2 weeks. I finished my shift and sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the sunset over the city skyline. The office towers glowed gold and orange, filled with people who had homes to go to, families who wanted them, futures that held promise instead of just more survival. Something had to change. Something had to give. Because this slow erasure of everything I was, couldn't be all that was left of my life. I thought about my parents. My father had been a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands and believed in the dignity of honest work. My mother had been a seamstress, taking in alterations and mending to help make ends meet. They'd been poor, but they'd been proud. They'd owned their home outright, saved every penny, and left me something solid when they passed. And I'd given it all away to a son who'd turned it into a weapon against me. No, that wasn't quite right. I'd given it away to a little boy I'd loved with my whole heart. What happened after that wasn't my failure as a mother. It was his failure as a son, and her success as a manipulator. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder. Something that whispered, "You don't deserve this." I drove back to the house, their house, and walked in to find them in the middle of dinner. They'd ordered from that expensive Italian place Melissa loved, the one where a single entree cost what I spent on groceries for a week. The smell made my stomach clench with hunger, but I walked past them without a word. "Mom," Eric called after me. "Did you find a place yet?" I stopped, but didn't turn around. "No, you've only got 2 weeks left," Melissa added, her voice sharp with impatience. "You need to take this seriously." I turned then, slowly, and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was beautiful, polished, confident. She'd never gone hungry, never worried about keeping the lights on, never sacrificed anything she didn't want to sacrifice. And she was sitting in my mother's chair, eating expensive food in my father's house, telling me I needed to take my own homelessness seriously. I am taking it seriously, I said quietly, more seriously than you could possibly understand. Something in my tone made Eric shift uncomfortably. If you need help with deposits or something, I don't want your help. The words came out firm, final. I don't want anything from you anymore. I walked to my room and closed the door. Behind me, I heard Melissa's voice, bright with satisfaction. Well, that was dramatic. They laughed together, my son and his wife, and that laughter followed me into the small bedroom where I'd once tucked that boy into bed and kissed his forehead and promised him that everything would be okay. I sat on the edge of the narrow mattress and pulled out the shoebox I kept under the bed. Inside were the remnants of my life before Eric, before motherhood had consumed everything else. Old photographs of me at 20, smiling and hopeful. A certificate from the community college where I'd completed 2 semesters of business courses before I got pregnant and had to drop out. A letter of recommendation from my first employer, praising my work ethic and reliability. I'd been someone once, before I became just Eric's mom, before my entire identity was reduced to the role of mother, and then eventually to the role of burden. At the bottom of the box was something I'd almost forgotten about, a business card, yellowed with age. It was from a woman named Margaret Chen who'd run a small cleaning company. She'd tried to recruit me years ago, said I had management potential, that I could run my own crew if I wanted to. I'd turned her down because Eric was 10 and needed me home in the evenings. I held the card up to the light. The phone number was probably disconnected. Margaret was probably retired or dead, but it was something. It was a memory of a time when someone had seen potential in me instead of just seeing someone to use and discard. I tucked the card in my pocket like a talisman. The next week crept by with agonizing slowness. I worked every shift I could get, pushing my body beyond its limits. My knees swelled so badly I could barely walk some days. My hands cracked and bled from the chemicals. I was exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix, tired in my bones and in my soul. But I kept showing up, kept working, kept putting one foot in front of the other because the alternative was giving up entirely, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. With 1 week left before eviction, I still had nowhere to go. I'd looked at rooms for rent in shared houses, but they all wanted deposits I couldn't afford. I'd called shelters, but they were full or had waiting lists months long. I'd even considered reaching out to distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in decades, but pride, my last remaining possession, stopped me. I took the folder with hands that had stopped shaking. For the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't despair or resignation. It was possibility. Small, fragile, but real. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, pulling out a business card and writing something on the back. "I have a friend who runs transitional housing for women in difficult circumstances. She has a room available. It's not much, but it's clean and safe and affordable. $300 a month, utilities included. Tell her I sent you." I looked down at the card, then back at Margaret, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. "Don't thank me yet," she said with a slight smile. "The job is hard work, and I have high standards. You'll earn every penny, but I think you already know how to do that." I left her office with the folder clutched to my chest like a life preserver. The transitional housing contact was my next stop, and by the end of that day, I'd seen the room, small but private, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto a quiet street. The shared kitchen was clean, the other residents quiet and respectful. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. It was safety. It was enough. I signed the paperwork and paid my first month's rent with money I'd been saving for emergencies. This qualified. This was the emergency I'd been unconsciously preparing for, the moment when everything fell apart, and I had to rebuild from nothing. 4 days before my eviction date, I came back to Eric's house. I couldn't call it home anymore, with moving boxes I'd gotten from behind a grocery store. I packed methodically, taking only what was truly mine, clothes that had seen better days but still served their purpose, the shoebox of photographs and memories, a few books my mother had loved, the chipped coffee mug that had survived decades of daily use. I didn't take anything Eric had ever given me. I left behind every birthday gift, every Christmas present, every token of affection that now felt tainted by his abandonment. I wanted nothing from him except what I'd already lost: my dignity, my home, my belief that love was enough. Melissa watched me pack with barely concealed satisfaction, checking items against some mental inventory to make sure I wasn't stealing anything. As if I'd ever steal from my own son. As if 30 years of honest work had taught me nothing about integrity. "Where are you going?" she asked, her tone suggesting she didn't really care, but felt obligated to perform concern. "I found a place," I said simply, continuing to fold my clothes. "Well, that's good. I was worried you'd end up on the street. That would have been so embarrassing for Eric." I stopped folding and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was young, beautiful, successful by conventional measures. But there was something hollow in her eyes, something that suggested all her polish and confidence was built on a foundation of deep insecurity. She'd needed to destroy me to feel secure in her marriage, needed to erase me to make room for herself. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Melissa," I said quietly, "I hope you never understand what it feels like to be where I am right now. I hope you never know what it's like to be discarded by the person you love most in the world. But if you ever do, I hope someone shows you more kindness than you've shown me." Her face flushed, and for a moment I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear that the universe might one day teach her this lesson personally. But then her expression hardened again, and she turned away without responding. Eric came home while I was loading the last box into my car. He stood in the driveway, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "So, you found somewhere," he said. "I did. That's good. I was worried." The word worried almost made me laugh. He'd been so worried that he'd evicted me on my birthday. So worried that he'd never once helped me look for housing or offered any assistance. So worried that he'd stood by while his wife erased me from his life. "Were you?" I asked. "Were you really worried, Eric?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Of course I was. You're my mother." "I am," I agreed. "I am your mother. The woman who raised you alone after your father left. The woman who worked 3 jobs so you could have new clothes for school. The woman who went without so you could have everything. I am your mother, and you threw me out of my own home on my birthday. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." I closed the trunk of my car with more force than necessary. "But you know what? I'm done trying to make you see it. I'm done trying to make you remember the boy you used to be. The boy who loved me and appreciated what I did for him. That boy is gone, and I need to accept that." "Mom, I have a new job," I interrupted, "and a new place to live. I'm going to be fine, not because of anything you did, but despite everything you did. And someday, Eric, when you have children of your own, I hope you love them as much as I loved you, and I hope they treat you better than you treated me." I got in my car without looking back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror once and saw him still standing in the driveway, hands in his pockets, watching me leave. Part of me wanted him to run after the car, to bang on the window, to beg me to stay and promise that everything would be different. But he didn't move. He just stood there, growing smaller and smaller until I turned the corner and he disappeared from view entirely. The transitional housing was in a converted house on a quiet street lined with old oak trees. My room was on the 2nd floor, small but clean, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the single window. I unpacked slowly, finding places for my few possessions, arranging them carefully as if I could build a new life from these fragments of the old one. That night, I sat on the narrow bed and allowed myself to cry for the first time since Eric had changed the locks. I cried for the years I'd lost, for the love I'd given that hadn't been returned, for the mother I'd been, and the burden I'd become. I cried until I had no tears left, until the well of grief ran dry and left behind something harder, something that felt almost like resolve. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood on that porch in the rain months ago. That woman had been broken by betrayal. This woman, the one sitting in this small room with her secondhand furniture and her wounded heart, this woman had learned something valuable. She'd learned that she could survive losing everything. She'd learned that kindness existed in unexpected places. She'd learned that 63 wasn't too old to start over. Most importantly, she'd learned that being invisible wasn't the same as being powerless. Monday morning, I showed up for my first day at Chen's Commercial Cleaning Services wearing my most professional outfit, a blouse I'd ironed carefully, and pants that had seen better days but were clean and presentable. Margaret met me in the conference room with 3 other new hires, all of them younger than me, all of them watching me with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. "This is Sandra," Margaret introduced me. "She has 30 years of experience in this industry, and she's going to be training to supervise crews. I expect all of you to learn from her." The training was intensive. Margaret's standards were high, her expectations clear. She didn't tolerate laziness or carelessness, but she also didn't tolerate disrespect or corner-cutting. She ran her business with the same principles my parents had instilled in me: do the work right, treat people fairly, and take pride in what you produce. I absorbed everything like a plant that had been dying of thirst, finally getting water. I learned scheduling systems and client management. I learned how to train new employees and handle customer complaints. I learned the business side of cleaning, bidding for contracts, managing supplies, calculating profit margins. But more than that, I remembered skills I'd forgotten I had. Before Eric was born, before single motherhood consumed my entire identity, I'd been a student, a learner, someone who enjoyed solving problems and organizing systems. That woman had been buried under decades of survival mode. But she wasn't dead. She'd just been waiting. Within 6 months, I'd become Margaret's most reliable supervisor. I managed 3 crews, handled some of our biggest accounts, and trained new employees with a patience born from years of understanding what it meant to struggle. The younger workers respected me, not because I demanded it, but because I showed up every day, solved problems calmly, and never asked them to do anything I wouldn't do myself. The raises came steadily, first to $20 an hour, then $22. Margaret added performance bonuses, and suddenly I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible. I opened a savings account for the first time in my life and watched the balance grow, small deposit by small deposit. It wasn't wealth, but it was security. It was breathing room. It was proof that hard work could still matter if you found the right person to work for. I moved out of transitional housing into a small studio apartment. Nothing fancy, just a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom that had seen better days. But it was mine. I bought my own furniture from thrift stores, chose my own curtains, arranged everything exactly how I wanted it. No one could tell me I was taking up too much space. No one could change the locks while I was at work. For the first time since Eric's betrayal, I started to feel human again. I made friends with other women in the building, shared coffee on Sunday mornings, exchanged recipes and life stories. They knew pieces of my history, enough to understand why I valued independence so fiercely, but they didn't pity me. They simply accepted me as I was. I thought about Eric sometimes, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he ever felt guilty, if Melissa had succeeded in erasing me completely from his conscience. But mostly, I was too busy rebuilding my life to dwell on what I'd lost. The past couldn't be changed. Only the future was still mine to shape. 2 years after I'd started working for Margaret, she called me into her office with an expression I couldn't quite read. My first thought was that I'd made some mistake, that despite everything, I was about to lose this job that had saved my life. "Sit down, Sandra," she said, gesturing to the chair I'd sat in that first day when I'd been desperate and hopeless. I sat, my hands folded in my lap, preparing myself for bad news. "I'm retiring," Margaret said simply. "My daughter keeps telling me I'm too old to be working this hard, and for once she might be right. I want to travel, see things, spend time with my grandchildren while I still can." My heart sank. "I understand. I'll start looking for—" "I'm not firing you," she interrupted with a slight smile. "I'm offering you the chance to buy the business." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What? I've built this company from nothing, and I don't want to sell it to some corporation that'll gut it for profit. I want it to go to someone who understands what it really is. Not just a cleaning service, but a place where people can rebuild their lives. Someone like you. Margaret, I can't afford to buy a business. I'm offering you a payment plan," she said, sliding papers across the desk. "You pay me a percentage of profits over the next 5 years. No bank loans, no outside investors. Just you and me, and the company we both believe in. If you're interested. I picked up the papers with trembling hands, scanning numbers that seemed impossible. The business was worth far more than I could ever hope to pay in a lump sum, but the payment structure Margaret proposed was manageable. Difficult, but manageable. Why me? I asked. The same question I'd asked 2 years earlier. Because I've watched you take nothing and turn it into something, Margaret said. Because you treat people with dignity even when you're exhausted. Because you understand that this business isn't about cleaning, it's about giving people a chance. And because you've earned it. I signed the papers 3 days later, my hand steady despite the enormity of what I was doing. At 65 years old, I became a business owner. The contracts, the crews, the responsibility, all of it was mine now. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The business continued to grow under my management. I maintained Margaret's standards but added my own touches. Better pay for workers, more comprehensive training, a policy of hiring people who needed second chances. Former addicts, ex-convicts, women escaping domestic violence. If they were willing to work hard, I was willing to give them a chance. Because I remembered what it felt like to need one. My reputation grew along with the business. Clients appreciated the quality of work, the reliability, the professionalism. We secured larger contracts, bigger buildings, better accounts. I hired an assistant manager, then a full office staff. The woman who'd once lived in her car was now running a company with 60 employees and annual revenues that would have seemed like fantasy numbers just a few years earlier. I thought of my parents often during this time. They'd taught me that honest work had value, that persistence mattered, that dignity wasn't something others could take from you unless you let them. They'd left me a house, and I'd given it away to a son who'd used it as a weapon. But they'd left me something more valuable too, a foundation of principles that no one could take away. 3 years after I'd bought the business, my assistant came into my office with a proposal request. "There's a couple looking for a cleaning service," she said. "They own a home in Riverside and want weekly cleanings. The address is—" She read it, and my blood turned cold. I knew that address. I'd lived at that address for decades. I'd raised my son there. I'd been evicted from there. "They're requesting a meeting this week to discuss their needs," my assistant continued, not noticing my reaction. Should I schedule something? Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to pass this client to another company, to never set foot in that house again. But another part of me, the part that had learned to turn pain into power, whispered something different. "Schedule it," I said calmly. "I'll handle this consultation myself." The day of the appointment arrived. I dressed in my best business suit, pulled my hair back professionally, and drove to the address that still appeared in my nightmares sometimes. The house looked different. New paint, renovated landscaping, an expensive car in the driveway. Eric and Melissa had clearly been making changes, erasing the last traces of the family who'd actually built this home. I rang the doorbell, the same doorbell I'd rung countless times when I'd forgotten my keys, back when this was still my home. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. Melissa answered. She looked older, more tired than I remembered, with lines of stress around her eyes that expensive creams couldn't quite hide. She didn't recognize me at first. Why would she? The broken woman she'd evicted had been replaced by a successful businesswoman in a tailored suit. "You must be from the cleaning service," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Thank goodness you're here. We're desperate." I stepped into the house, taking in the changes. New furniture, new paint, new everything. They'd gutted my parents' home and rebuilt it in their image. But underneath the renovations, I could still see the bones of the house I'd known. The slightly uneven floor in the hallway, the window that always stuck, the room where I'd raised my son alone. "Let me show you what we need," Melissa continued, leading me through rooms I knew better than she ever would. "We've been through 3 cleaning services this year. None of them meet our standards. The house always looks dirty. Things don't get done properly. It's been a nightmare." Eric appeared from the kitchen, and the moment our eyes met, I saw recognition flash across his face. His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, guilt, confusion, and finally something that looked almost like fear. "Mom?" His voice cracked on the word. Melissa's head whipped around. "Mom? What are you talking about?" This is the cleaning service representative. Melissa, Eric said slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. This is my mother. I watched the color drain from Melissa's face as understanding dawned. The woman she'd thrown out, the woman she'd dismissed as worthless, was standing in her living room wearing a suit that cost more than the monthly rent she'd once demanded from me. Sandra, I said, extending my hand to Melissa with cool professionalism. Sandra Morrison, owner of Chen's Commercial Cleaning Services. Though we have met before, I used to live here. Melissa's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Eric looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Shall we discuss your cleaning needs? I continued, pulling out my tablet with the practiced ease of someone who'd done hundreds of these consultations. You mentioned you've had difficulty finding a service that meets your standards. I don't understand, Melissa finally managed. You're a cleaning lady. How are you? A business owner, I corrected gently. I employ 60 people, service some of the largest commercial properties in the city, and yes, occasionally take on residential clients when the situation interests me. I looked around the living room, at the space where my parents' furniture had once stood. This situation interests me very much. Eric found his voice. Mom, I didn't know you'd started a business. I thought you were still what? I asked. Still living in my car? Still scraping by on minimum wage? Still waiting for my son to remember I existed? I kept my tone neutral, professional, but the words landed with the weight I intended. A lot has changed in 3 years, Eric. I've changed. Melissa recovered some of her composure, though her hands shook slightly as she crossed her arms. Well, this is awkward. Obviously, we can't hire you. It would be too weird. Can't you? I asked, meeting her eyes steadily. From what I understand, you're desperate. You've been through 3 services this year, none satisfactory. Word travels in this industry, Melissa. I know why those other companies dropped you as a client. Her face flushed. That's not... You're demanding, dismissive of workers, and you refuse to pay the rates that quality service requires. I continued calmly. You treat cleaning staff like they're invisible, like their work has no value. Does that sound familiar? The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Eric stared at the floor, unable or unwilling to defend his wife. Melissa's jaw tightened, her carefully constructed superiority cracking at the edges. However, I said, swiping through my tablet, I'm willing to take you on as clients. My standard rate for a home this size is $300 per week. That includes deep cleaning, organization, and maintenance. We require a 3-month contract minimum, payment due at the beginning of each month. $300 a week? Melissa's voice pitched high with outrage. That's robbery. The last service charged half that. And how did that work out for you? I asked mildly. Quality costs money, Melissa. You taught me that yourself, remember? When you told me I should get a better job if I wanted to afford rent in my own house. Eric flinched at the reminder. Mom, please. We can't afford that right now. Things have been tight. The mortgage payments. The mortgage? I interrupted, looking at him directly for the first time. I thought this house was paid off when I gave it to you. What happened? He wouldn't meet my eyes. We took out a home equity loan for renovations and investments that didn't quite pan out. And Melissa's been between jobs for a while, so we've been living on one income, and the payments are... He trailed off, the full picture of their financial troubles evident in his expression. So they'd taken my parents' debt-free home and mortgaged it for renovations I'd never approved, for investments that had failed, for the expensive lifestyle Melissa demanded. They'd squandered the security I'd given them, and now they were drowning in debt. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, they'd evicted me because I couldn't afford to pay them rent. Now they couldn't afford to pay for basic services in the house that should have been mine. I see, I said quietly. That must be difficult. Melissa's eyes narrowed. Are you here to gloat? To rub our faces in the fact that you somehow managed to pull yourself up? Fine. You win. You can leave now. I'm not here to gloat, I said, and I realized as I spoke that it was true. I'd thought I wanted revenge, wanted to see them suffer as I'd suffered. But standing in this house, looking at my son's defeated posture and his wife's brittle desperation, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a profound sense of completion, as if a chapter that needed ending had finally reached its final page. "I'm here to offer you a contract," I continued. "My standard rate, professional service, no special treatment. You'll be just another client. I won't be cleaning your house myself. I have crews for that. But I'll oversee the work personally to ensure it meets my standards." "Why?" Eric asked, finally looking up at me. "After everything we did to you, why would you help us?" I considered the question carefully. Why was I doing this? Not for them, certainly. Maybe for me. Maybe because this was the final step in reclaiming my power, in proving that their cruelty hadn't destroyed me. Or maybe because somewhere beneath all the hurt and anger, a small part of me still remembered the little boy I'd raised, even if that boy had grown into a man I barely recognized. "Because holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere," I said finally. "Because my business succeeds on professionalism, not personal feelings. And because despite everything, I don't want to see you lose this house. My parents built something here that mattered, even if you don't understand that." Melissa started to protest, but Eric cut her off. "We'll take the contract. Eric, we can't afford—" "We'll take it," he repeated firmly, showing the first hint of backbone I'd seen from him in years. "We'll figure out the money somehow. Mom is right. We need help, and her company is the best." I pulled up the contract on my tablet and watched as Eric signed with trembling fingers. When it was done, I forwarded the documents to my office and tucked the tablet away. "My crew will start next Monday," I said. "They'll arrive at 9 a.m. Please make sure someone is home to let them in. If you have any issues with the service, contact my office. Not me directly. This is a business relationship now, nothing more." I turned to leave, but Eric's voice stopped me. "Mom, wait. I'm sorry. For everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know—" "I know you're sorry," I interrupted, not unkindly. "But sorry doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give me back the 3 years I spent rebuilding my life from nothing. It doesn't undo the nights I slept in my car, or the meals I skipped, or the humiliation of being thrown out by my own son." Tears ran down his face now, and part of me, the part that had kissed scraped knees and chased away nightmares, wanted to comfort him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd learned that love without respect was just another form of slavery. "You taught me something valuable, though," I continued. "You taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive losing everything and still build something beautiful, that my worth isn't determined by whether my son loves me or my daughter-in-law respects me. So in a way, I should thank you." "Don't," Eric whispered. "Please don't thank me. I don't deserve that." "You're right, you don't." I adjusted my purse on my shoulder, preparing to leave this house for what would probably be the last time. "But I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it because it's true. Pain can destroy us or transform us. You chose destruction for me, but I chose transformation for myself." I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the floor my father had installed 50 years ago. At the threshold, I paused and looked back one final time. "Take care of this house, Eric. It deserves better than what you've given it so far. And when you have children of your own someday, remember this moment. Remember what it costs to love someone and what it costs to betray them. Be a better father than you were a son." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out into the afternoon sunlight, got into my car, not the old Honda that had seen me through my darkest days, but a newer, more reliable vehicle that represented how far I'd come, and drove away from that house for the final time. As I drove, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, standing in the rain with her key that wouldn't turn, her world collapsing around her. I wished I could go back and tell her that she'd survive this, that she'd do more than survive, she'd thrive, that the worst day of her life would become the first day of her transformation. I learned something important through all of this. Being invisible isn't the same as being powerless. Sometimes the people who overlook you, who dismiss you as unimportant, who think your silence means acceptance, those people are the ones who should be most afraid, because they never see you coming. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Another potential client, another consultation to schedule, another day in the life I'd built from the ruins of what I'd lost. I smiled and typed back my response. Then I drove toward my apartment, toward my business, toward the future I'd earned through every hardship and every heartbreak. Eric and Melissa would pay their bills, my crew would clean their house, and I would continue building a life that belonged entirely to me, defined by my choices rather than others' cruelty. That was my justice. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into the best thing I ever did for myself. And that, more than anything else, was the sweetest victory of all.